Hi Will, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. We're back at it again.
A long time since we've done one of these.
Yeah.
We're in a new place. Anyway, I haven't got enough time to talk about that. That's exciting.
So what are we going to talk about?
We're going to talk about a very exciting project, our Postcode Mead Box, which is something we launched, November time actually, because the harvest was a bit late, so it came out a bit later than we'd hoped. And yeah, very exciting. What is the Postcode Box?
So the Postcode Box is 4 different meads with 4 different honeys, fermented in the same process at 5.5% with the same yeast. So the only variable within it is the honey itself, and the only variable in the honey is the area that the honey came from.
And presumably what the bees have been munching on.
Yeah, so what we've tried to do is show 2 urban honeys against each other. So we went with East London and West London. And then we chose 2 honeys from inside of England, East and West. So we went for Oxfordshire and Bishop Stortford.
Bishop Stortford, testing your UK geography.
Yeah, I really went like, yeah.
Right, should we get into this?
Let's have a look. So first thing you're going to sort of get in the box is a little brochure.
Which explains everything about the honeys and where they come from.
So let's not ruin
the surprise. Yeah.
And then inside there is going to be the 4 honeys you see in front of you, up here, corresponding meads below. Right,
should we get into some tasting then? James.
Let's go for it. So I always like to start off with the Bishop Stortford. God, almost got me again, Tom.
Almost got you again.
So let's start with that.
It doesn't sound like a real place.
It does sound a little fictitious.
There we go. So we've got a little pot of honey there. So let's do a tasting of the honey first. And what are we tasting here then, Will? This is actually looks quite set, this one.
So, yeah, honey is an amorphous liquid, Tom.
Is it?
And it will crystallise on its own over time. A little bit of heat will make it move again, but there's nothing wrong with it.
It has been freezing in here as well, so...
So the first thing we like to do when we do a tasting, get to know the honey. So how the honey correlates to how the mead's going to taste is a really, really interesting process to go through. So not everything you taste in the honey is going to come through in the mead, but some things will be sort of pushed forward, or some things will be taken away, especially as you ferment, creating alcohol, you lose some of the sweetness, which takes away some of that, the more sort of usual honey profile.
Yeah, so you can get some of these other flavours that are in there.
A little bit more of the nuanced sort of profiles in there.
Let me get a little bit of citrus on there, a little bit lemony, maybe. Very, very...
So it's really quite fruity.
Yeah.
So generally when we work with quite raw honey, there's a lot more floral character to it. It's a little bit more fruity, it's a little bit stone fruity, maybe apricot. But then it's got a nice sort of rounded sweetness, there's a little bit of acidity, that little bit of citrus in there.
That's why I was coming, yeah.
And it's actually quite short.
It is, yeah, that's a fair point,
So when we're looking at sort of creating meads from these sorts of honey, we're trying to exacerbate certain characteristics we like in it. So when we sort of want to showcase the florality, we'll sort of, make it a really light yeast so it doesn't have a lot of profile. When it's fruit forward, we'll use something, a more fruity estered yeast. In this case, we've gone for our house yeast, which is a lager yeast, which has quite a neutral tone to it as well.
Yeah, and that's the reason. These are all 5.5%, so kind of relatively approachable. If there are a group of 4 of you, this is the perfect rainy day activity, or a sunny day activity. But
so the first thing that I noticed as well compared to some of our other products is we get that nice muskiness because we're using really, really raw honey here. So we're sort of you get a little bit of waxy sort of musky profile come in. Then underneath that there's a little tiny bit of there's a fruit character, there's stone fruit, maybe it's like plum or prune, or there's not so much apricot as there was before.
A little bit sherbety maybe? I don't know whether that's just me.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that lactic acid sort of profile in there as well.
I think these really come into their own when you compare them. I think that's the idea.
There's a nice sort of astringency in there. There's this sort of little bit of tannin structure, and without sort of any addition of tea or oak, it's quite unusual to get tannin structure in the mead, and that's coming from that really raw honey as well.
Yeah, it's really cool. Number 2 we're going to go on to is the other rural honey, the Oxfordshire honey, which It's just. Cotswolds.
Cotswolds, Oxfordshire, Shropshire.
No, it's not Shropshire.
Not Shropshire?
It's Oxfordshire. Just because they're very
Just have a
different.
guess.
They
Just showing how many names
are
of
very
shears I know.
different places. Right, second honey. Oh,
Very much.
nice little pick me up in the afternoon. This honey.
That's it.
It's completely different.
So this again, this is more floral. This is more of a typical sort of English honey.
Yeah, I'm just there was
Spring honey.
Yeah, there's a flavour I was getting in there. That
There's actually a little bit of orange in there. Honey can be quite difficult to sort of pick out the nuances because the sugar profile is so strong and wrapped around it that the way to sort of do it is to pin it against another honey like we're sort of doing.
Yeah,
in this
exactly. And
process.
that's why this is such a nice activity.
So there's a little bit more orange. There's a little bit of that sort of typical, almost like caramelly sort of honey profile compared to the last. It's a lot longer. It's almost like there's some boiled lollies going on. There's some.
I would say there's a little bit of maltiness. I don't know. There's something else that is in there for me. Anyway, it's very different to the first one, and that's kind of the whole exciting thing.
Again, that's exacerbated on the nose. We don't have the muskiness that we do from the first mead.
No, it's a lot cleaner.
It's a little bit more like a bit more sort of apple in there.
Oh yeah, and it's very different on the mouth.
It's a little bit of like there's some lighter sort of floral notes. There's some like herbs in there, like a musky sort of like a sage or something like that.
Yeah, and you get that as you come through on the palate as well. It feels drier, even though these are all the same sweetness. It does feel like it's dried out a little bit.
Oh, and it's a lot. It's a lot cleaner, but it's also a little bit more acidy as well. It's a bit higher acid profile.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't taste as sweet as the first one. I guess that's the fruitiness versus the florality as well. Even though the honey itself had a bit more of that sort of sweet body to it than the first honey, but when you sort of took that away, it's a little bit more like hedgerow and sort of a little bit almost bitter, and you've lost that astringency from the first one. That's really cool.
No, it is really cool. That's really. It's just really fascinating to kind of watch what the different honeys are doing.
This is the first time I'm tasting these all together. I've tasted them as the process has gone on, and I sort of wanted to wait so I could sit down and really enjoy them. That's really quite different. Borage. So let's have a dip on this. So this one's a little bit
Runnier.
less, a little bit more runny, less crystal.
It's longer, I'd say.
I remember this one. That one is a lot more. Again, we got a little bit of that boiled sort of like barley sweets, barley lollies. And then we've got, there's almost like a bit of vanillin. And then there's a whole lot
It's quite subtle as it goes through.
it's almost like lime leaves in the back. Something quite, a little bit herbaceous, a little bit bitter.
Yeah, no. And then a big honey kind of aftertaste that you swallow and you get that retronasal.
But to me, it finishes with these barley sweets.
I think for some reason that doesn't taste as sweet as the other ones. I could eat loads of that.
Yeah, and I think a little bit to do with that is that it tastes a little bit more acidic than the other two.
Maybe, yeah, maybe.
And that's maybe why it hasn't crystallised as much as well, a little bit higher acid content.
Potentially.
So we've got a little bit more of that sort of musky nose again, like we got on number one.
It's lighter, isn't it? Like obviously that honey colour is transferred through. This reminds me of that borage honey.
Yeah.
Sorry, the borage mead that we did. That was almost not white.
Almost 100% opaque. Opaque? Yeah, that's the right word. There's a bit more citrus on the nose. And a lot more floral than the other two. Also a little bit more basic. The other two had a lot more going on. It's more like the first one was quite clean.
Yeah,
on
it
the
is.
nose.
It is. There's not too much going on. It's all in the middle of the palate, and it's quite short. It kind of finishes a bit shorter, I would say.
There's a little bit of a, it's quite pear, like pear skin.
Yeah.
There's quite an aggressive bit of acid on the front part of the palate, and then it cleans up, and it's actually quite neutral. The other thing to remind yourself of is that we're jumping through these quite quickly, and that when you're tasting honey and then you go straight on to tasting the mead, that sweetness level, allowing the palate to adjust, is something that's a little bit more difficult. So the first sip will always be a little bit sort of clean and doesn't taste as sweet, but as you sort of work your way through it, you'll start to get a little bit more of that complexity and a little bit more of that round mouthfeel from the sweetness coming through. There's almost something that smells not medicinal, but like eucalyptusy.
Mentally, maybe? Like a little bit of that. So that was the Lee Bridge Road, was it? Or the Leytonstone?
So that one there was up in deep northeast.
To northeast London. So we're going to West London now, after this.
So we're going across West London for our final four. We're banging our way through these.
Well, those are the comments for the last ones, is that,
We waffled
too much and talk about the weather. Oh, it's so cool how different all these honeys are.
Yeah, this is probably the most floral out of them all.
There's so much going on in there. So do you want to...
Yeah, I quite enjoyed that one.
Also, how do you always end up with honey in your hands? Whatever you do.
It's the joy. Again, most floral out of it. There's probably tastes a little bit more like fruit blossoms and a little bit, not quite perfumey, but on the edge of being perfumey. And again, that sweetness, this one's quite long and sticky. A little bit of that sort of caramel, a little bit of that sugar is really quite forward. It'd be really interesting to see how that translates. So let's number 4. Thank you. Again, another light honey from London. Our nose is like deep skin apples. A little bit of musk underneath it. There's a flower in there. Almost like a little bit of ivy as well, those sort of like deep green leaves. Well, first thing I noticed on ice, it's a lot more acidic in the front end.
Definitely a lot more acidic. A little bit of something else going on that I can't remember. Maybe it feels like higher alcohols or like something like that. Just teasing you
There's
a
a
little
little bit of not a sting, but there's a little bit of that, a little bit more aggressive on the palate.
Yeah, you definitely know it's there.
There's a rind, like a bit of like almost grapefruity sort of.
Yeah, something like that kind of brings it back.
But that one there tastes different, completely different to the other three.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
It's a lot more pear juice, like that sort of. It's a little bitter and sweet, and I don't know. That was quite enjoyable.
Well, guys, if you're tasting along at home, or if you end up buying one of these kits, let us know what you think. What was your favourite? What did you think of it? We always love a bit of feedback.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Thanks for stopping by.
thanks for guys.